Good evening, guys, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to the DNF1 podcast. Now, before you're all watching, obviously, make sure you like and subscribe. And, of course, hit the comments. Obviously, make sure you get your comments in. We are, of course, covering the review of the United States Grand Prix yesterday at the Circuit of the Americas. Now, obviously, for all the viewers that do watch regularly, you're probably looking at the screen now thinking Adam's really changed from a Ferrari fan now to a Red Bull fan. I mean, I don't think, obviously, that's... something that I would imagine Adam doing, but obviously, no, I'm his brother. Obviously, I have been on a few times. Obviously, if people do remember my face, but I will be covering Adam's role this week, helping out the channel whilst we obviously are covering the races, and of course the Mexican Grand Prix, which is this weekend as well. But first things first, of course, we are covering the race, which was yesterday, and I've got one of the regulars on the show tonight as well with me. We've got Lee. Lee, first of all, how you doing, mate? And it was quite a good race yesterday, actually, to be fair.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for asking, Luke. I hope you're good. But yeah, the race, it was an enjoyable race, to be honest. And although the championships are wrapped up, we're still getting really entertaining racing, which is obviously some fans are the racing will get worse because there's nothing to race for. There's plenty to race for. It's so enjoying to see the drive. Yeah, it's really enjoying to see the drivers put the score on display, and what a few fights we had yesterday.
I think even the sprint weekend as well. I think it was quite interesting, the qualifying and, even, seeing the actual qualifying session that Max Verstappen, had his track, obviously with track limits, had his time deleted and had to start from 6th position in the race, which I think made it more interesting. Obviously, I think we all assumed, that Max, all right, he won the race yesterday, but I think we all assumed that he would come through the field, but it wasn't sort of plain far-fetched, was it? I think, it took him, potentially half of the race
to really 28 laps.
Yeah, to really get himself into a position, but also it took him a while to really get past, the two once Lewis got in front of Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc, at the start, it was more, when was Max going to do it? And then obviously where was he going to sort of play into the role of this? I mean, we'll talk, briefly at the start. Max obviously starting 6th, but we'll talk about the two at the front, which were Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris. And Lando Norris got the dream start, didn't he? Got away really well, very good reaction time, and pipped Charles Leclerc into turn 1. And from there, Lee, I mean, what do you think is going through Lando Norris's head at the time? He knows he's in front. He's got clear air. The McLaren, of course, was good in clear air in practice and in qualifying as well. So, to see Lando go into the lead in turn 1 was actually quite remarkable, to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing obviously he was thinking is like, yes, I've had a great start. This is amazing. I'm leading the race. That was obviously the first thing he would be thinking. But it's like, as he said afterwards, the fact that McLaren could lead the race means he can control the pace. And we know McLaren eat their tyres for dinner. And he could obviously take it easy and prolong the life of his tyres. It's still something that needs to be worked on by the McLaren. They've come a long way, but the tyres is still something that they're not as good as the other teams at the moment. So he can control it, and he's obviously thinking it's his 100th Grand Prix. Could I actually win this? I could actually win this. And obviously we know he didn't, but I'm sure he was thinking it. It's obviously it's human nature to think that when you just want that win so much, that first win in Formula One. But it was a lightning start, and we know starting P2 in Kota can easily be converted into a lead because of the way that first corner was profiled.
Yeah, I think so, and I think as addressed, I think within qualifying and then practice, McLaren had some very good race pace, or obviously quick like 1 lap pace as well, and they tested a lot with the medium tires, I think, as well throughout testing and throughout the practice, which, as you said, like eating through the tires, I believe, and obviously it then addressed sort of later on into the race, but I felt that was, the dream getaway for Lando. He's been knocking on the door the last few races. Piastri, I thought, was quite unfortunate as well. We'll talk about the start with the McLarens. I think Piastri started in P9 or P10, I think it was.
P10, yeah.
And he got up to P6. And, it came up to the S's. And obviously he collided with Esteban Ocon and resulted in a retirement for Oscar Piastri, and resulted also in a retirement for Esteban Ocon during that stint, obviously a few laps later. But it's promising to see with McLaren, isn't it? I think, I've not been able to, I've been able to watch the podcast and see obviously what you guys have been saying as well. But I mean, for your own first thoughts as well, even seeing McLaren back in the front and also, Piastri sort of at the fight as well. It's good to really see McLaren get back into that order towards the end of the season.
Oh yeah, they've come a long way from the start of the season, and obviously with Piastri, he's still a rookie and he's doing some amazing performances, but he's still a rookie, so I'm sure he's looking forward to getting this season under his belt completely. He can review it over the winter, and rookies generally take that next step up into their second season once they've had the chance to analyze their experience and get to tracks they've already done at least once. So obviously this is his first time at COTA, and where other tracks this season he had been at before. So there is always going to be an improvement next year, and he's already this impressive now. I can't wait to see how he's going to be in future seasons.
Exactly, especially for next season as well. I think we're all looking forward to seeing how good that McLaren car is going to be at the start of next season as well. Obviously, guys, in the comments, get your comments in what you think of the race last night. Make sure you, of course, like the stream and, of course, subscribe. Again, as I mentioned before, we'll be helping out this week with the channel whilst Adam is away. And obviously, yeah, I was actually a bit shocked that Corny wasn't here tonight. I was like, Red Bull he was just angry this morning, wasn't he? I think to see with Lewis Hamilton getting the disqualification, which we are going to talk about. I think it's one of the hot topics, obviously, from the weekend. Obviously, we will go a bit more, I'd say, in depth with the race. But obviously, post-race was very interesting. And I really felt for both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, both disqualified due to an infringement. And this is obviously what was stated within sort of keywords. Basically, from what I'm going to read here, the FIA decided later to disqualify both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. Both drivers failed a physical floor and plank wear inspection. And basically along the lines of the skids on the bottom of each of their cars were designed to impose a minimum ground clearance for the cars, and they had worn away to the point that they were no longer within the F1 regulations. Now, I'll be honest with you, Lee, that's the first time I've actually seen something like this. And it begs the point as well with the FIA at the moment. I mean, we've all had discussions over the last couple of years about the new rules and regulations and what can you do, what you can't do. Do you generally believe that there is something against Lewis in a way? Do you think that there's something that, for me personally, I think he was outstanding. I think he was one of the quickest guys on track yesterday. And I felt if he had had a couple of laps to go, he could have generally caught Max and passed him to go on to win the race. Could you imagine the scenes if Lewis would have actually won the race and they'd have disqualified him there and there? Like, that would have been absolutely outrageous. But, I mean, what are your thoughts, obviously, on the two disqualifications yesterday?
Well, firstly, I don't think Lewis is targeted as much as some people suggest he may be. Obviously, the FIA are shambles. They're so inconsistent. They make one decision one weekend and then change it another weekend, and they look back at previous seasons and where they've done a penalty one way, then they change their mind, and obviously a plank thing is a very basic part of the sport, and it's so odd that this is being breached.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that 50% of the four drivers taken, which was obviously Max and Lando, I believe, were the other two drivers tested along with Charles and Lewis, but 50% failed. That should really raise a question of how compliant is the rest of the grid, which you could just imagine the outcry if they actually decided, and 50%, that's a higher failure rate. Let's just check the whole grid. 90% failed. Okay, we've just got Max and Lando left on the grid. Everyone else is disqualified. And that's the kind of situation that they could have left themselves in and the way they've handled it. I think it makes the sport look silly. As you said, if Lewis had one, which if the race of Mercedes, I think, failed Lewis a bit on the strategy. Obviously, he locked up. He had the slow pit stop. And he lost those vital tenths of a second, which would have given him that extra lap if he wasn't that far behind. And you could argue when they pitted him, try not to elongate the first stint with a one stop, that 1.5 seconds at the finish line, he could have easily had in his advantage in the end of the race. But if they'd taken a win away from him, like they did with Spa in 08, was it? I think it was 08 when they gave the victory to Raikkonen because he cut the corner.
Yeah.
And although he gave it back and they said he hadn't, they had the victory taken away. But Lewis is not the Lewis of then. He's a world superstar. He's obviously all these drivers are role models. But as the FIA like to say, Lewis is a role model in the sport.
I was just going to say, yeah, there's certain types of role models apparently according to the FIA.
Yeah. So he's because of the impact and he's so popular in the US. If that had happened, there was a race victory taken away, it'd have been silly. And I think it's bad enough that he was taken away. The Charles and Lewis were taken away. I think obviously the FIA made a nice big statement at the beginning of the weekend. They've got unlocked their new €1 million fine.
Or was it in English? Is it £968,000 or something like that?
And as Max said, it's like touching a rear wing is €50,000. What's a €1 million penalty? But I think that they should have easily just gone, okay, Charles, Lewis, not Max, sorry. Tough. Here's your €1 million fine. We've just unlocked it. There you go. Give us a big payday. You can keep your positions. And I think that may have been a bit better, but I think the FA just looking silly.
Yeah,
and it really makes the sport undoes all the hard work that Liberty and the obviously FOM have been doing with the sport over the last few years.
No, they are. I mean, I fully agree, mate. And it's easy for me to say. Obviously, as I'm a Red Bull fan, of course, and I obviously want Red Bull to win. But when I see this, and obviously I've been watching the sport for over 20 years, and it's. For me, I think the last couple of years, I mean, Courtney's obviously put a really good point in there. We will talk about it during the week as well with our Mexico Grand Prix preview. And he's basically said the FIA continues to create toxicity. I can't even say that word properly. Within the F1 fan base and the poor student, and it does relate back to sort of 2021 when they sort of just didn't know what to do. There was obviously two great drivers at the front of the grid, obviously fighting for a championship, and they sort of made their own rules as it goes along. And I take your point on Lee, where Lewis and Charles were disqualified from the race, but then the other 50 or so % of the grid also failed. So why wasn't they brought into the equation? Why weren't they disqualified? For me personally, they've had an embarrassment once in America before, back in, was it 2006 with the tire issue?
Yeah,
was it
Indianapolis,
and only 6 cars started the race. So there's no one saying that can't potentially happen in the terms of a race result where there can only be 6 drivers completing the race. I mean, off the top of my head, obviously I did write them down. I mean, in terms of retirements, if you take away Leclerc and Lewis, you had obviously Ocon, Piastri, Alonso retired. So there's, 5. So that's a quarter of the field retired. So I don't think there's any real. It sounds a bit silly saying it, but I don't think there's any real problem to why they shouldn't have DQ'd the rest of the other drivers. And I think that's where the debate sort of comes in. Why was it just Lewis Hamilton, or why was it also Charles Leclerc because of their status in the sport? So yeah, there's a lot to talk about on that. It's a lot of opinions, and obviously to see where people think of it as well. I've got a comment here from Hanny. Hope you're well. If Max didn't have problems with his brakes, then Lewis wasn't even close to Max. Yeah, that was a strange one. Obviously, I do want to go into that. Obviously, moving on, sort of later into the show about the issue that Max did have with his brakes, and obviously the frustration that he showed towards his race engineer. But there was a couple of key moments, obviously, in the first sort of part of the race, and you did mention about Lewis Hamilton with the lockup and the slower pit stop as well, which it cost him potentially 3 to 4 seconds in the race, obviously going into the second part of it. And that's just goes to shows, doesn't it, mate, the fine margins and the concentration that these top elite drivers have to go through. And Lewis Hamilton unfortunately made that mistake, and it's obviously allowed Max to get into position and obviously have clear air to go on to win the race. I mean, at that point in the race, mate, did you believe that Mercedes got the strategy right, sort of keeping Lewis out for an extra few laps? Or do you feel that they should have brought him in at least 2 or 3 laps earlier to really sort of try and maintain with the two, with Verstappen and with Norris?
I understand why they went for this strategic gamble to begin with, because they're like, if we copy Red Bull, we're not going to beat them on the same strategy. Obviously, they had the tyre offset on the different types of tyres that they were going to try and go with if they decided to do a 2-stop. But the fact that you could see the Max's deltas after the first couple of laps, how quickly he was closing the gap, they should have looked and go, no, there's no way Lewis is going to be able to lose that 8 seconds or whatever he did to Max in those 5 laps. They got after 2 laps, okay, we've lost 4 seconds. Let's call him in. Let's stop the pain. We're not going to one stop's not going to work, and which they did, but they just did that decision too late, and obviously gave Lewis even more work to do at the end. Which, on top of that, then he obviously had the slow pit stop and the lockup. But his tires were already gone at the point he had the lockup anyway, because they were obviously trying to push to a 1-stop.
It was funny it was funny that Norris, even after the round of pit stops, done the exact same thing in the same corner. I think it was like 4 or 5 laps later, wasn't it?
Yeah. And it's right. It could be down to the wind, because obviously they were talking about the high winds at the circuit. Obviously, referring to the penalty, Mercedes and Ferrari said it was because it was a really bumpy surface, which was unexpected in the limited setup time. So you don't know if the bumps and the wind was just disturbing the cars in that corner on top of it's just the wind on its own. So it's just another weekend of could have been, but it's definitely Max's hardest victory this season, and it's nice to see him work really hard to get that result. And we know he can do it under the pressure, only because he's done it before. But he didn't come through the field within a couple of laps like he has done in the past. But he got the result, and it was like an impending Max, like the Fernando Alonso of old is like Fernando's coming, Fernando's gone. It's Max is coming, Max is gone. That's my little bit on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's nothing much else to say on that, to be fair, and I fully agree. It's I think it took a lot longer, as we said earlier. It took a lot longer for Max to really sort of get into the front and obviously get in position where he could try and pull away. And then obviously, they had the issue as well. I want to talk about Ferrari a little bit now. I know Adam might be watching, and I know Adam's obviously he's going to watch, and I know Adam's going to be thinking very carefully about what I'm saying about Ferrari. Charles Leclerc stuck with plan A, didn't go with plan E, didn't go with plan F, whatever. But I think there was a real key moment in the race, and in the end of it, because of the penalties, Ferrari actually got what they wanted, which was Carlos Sainz finishing on the podium. But what was your thoughts on that? To see that Ferrari they would allow Carlos Sainz to get through, but did they not realize that Sergio Perez was literally catching both of them at the same time? And I mean, in the end of it, it's worked out that Sainz didn't get caught by Perez, but it was just so quickly that Leclerc was then caught by Perez and got past him straight away. I know Leclerc had a bit of a different strategy, but what was your thoughts on Ferrari this weekend? Obviously, did they really feel that they were good enough to win the race after a strong qualifying?
I mean, there's one of the things Charles seems to really thrive in is the sprint weekends. He likes getting pole on a sprint weekend, and for some reason, it just works for him having that limited practice setup time. Maybe he's quicker to find that sweet spot for him where other drivers or teams struggle. I don't know the reason for it, but I don't think Ferrari had the race pace of Red Bull, McLaren, or Mercedes yesterday. They were in a bit of their own part of the circuit for a lot of the race. Once Max got past, once Lewis got past, and they were just there. And then obviously the fight between them upset Charles a little bit. The way that Carlos was like, so I'm just coming through. And obviously he did just make it to space, but Sergio was coming at rate knots, and I think that caught Ferrari out, that they weren't expecting Sergio to come at them so strong that late in the point in the race. And it could have been that Sergio got Carlos as well. I think that was more luck for Ferrari than they planned to keep Sergio at bay.
Talking to Sergio, again, I think he started a bit low down, didn't he? I think it was just inside the top 10. Got himself into a P4 in the end. Obviously, crossed the line in sixth. It was sixth. Was it sixth? He crossed. I'm just trying to work out. Perez up to fourth. No, sorry, P5. He crossed the line in P5. So obviously, he gained the one position. What do you believe is the right decision for next year? Because I know there's going to be a lot of talk about Sergio Perez's seat at Red Bull next year. I mean, if you want my honest opinion, I believe Sergio has been a very good asset for Red Bull over the last few years. He's not good enough, in my opinion, to win a world championship. I do believe he's good enough to potentially win a Grand Prix on the odd weekend there and there. But I do believe Red Bull need to be looking at, can they really get a second driver to potentially challenge Max, but also and even show more dominance towards the sport? But then obviously there's the flip side of it, like we had with the Mercedes 2016, 2015 with Rosberg and Hamilton. They don't really want a friction between the two teammates. My dream for Red Bull would be Max Verstappen teaming up with Lando Norris. I think that would be an absolutely unbelievable team, unstoppable team for years to come. But what's your general thoughts on Sergio Perez? Do you believe that next year he could come back stronger, or do you feel that his time at Red Bull is coming to an end?
As a driver, I personally like him. I've really enjoyed watching his career. I unfortunately do think his time is coming to an end. We know Max has the ability to chew up his teammates and spit them out because it's the mental pressure and the onslaught against that kind of skill and domination, even within the team, not when just Max is dominating the sport, but within the team. And I think it's finally got to Sergio. Obviously, the car development, they drive differently. Obviously, in the car, the level of the performance that car can get, he should be finishing in the podium near enough every weekend. He should be there. Not that Max has had many errors this season, but when there's been an upset, it should be Sergio there to win, not Max having to come through the field to then win because Sergio hasn't done enough to win it himself. And obviously they're trying to get Sergio for P2 in the Drivers' Championship, which had never had a 1-2 before. But I think Red Bull need to think of the bigger picture, long term. Of they may dominate next year, but they may not. They may have to fight for it. And if there's a fight for it, where's Sergio going to be as a teammate to Max to back him up? Because you're going to need that backup for the strategic options. If you've got 2 McLarens, 2 Mercedes, 2 Aston Martins, and 2 Ferraris between your 2 Red Bull teammates, there's no backup. You're out the points. There you go. There's your Constructors' Championship at the very least. And I think that's where they need to think of. We need a stronger number 2. You're right. You don't want to upset the balance of the team. And I do think with Daniel, if he performs well, I think he's going to be injected into the seat next year. Because I think Red Bull have had enough of Sergio's performances. Although he did have a clean race, which for Sergio as of late is actually an improvement. It's a sad thing to say, but it's nice that he didn't hit anyone.
Yeah, I mean, especially from Suzuka as well. From Qatar as well. Obviously, there was a few incidents with himself. It was good to see Sergio cross the line with no penalties, no issues. In the end, obviously finishing P4 is not a bad result. And obviously, as you said, the Drivers' Championship, he was originally 19 points in front of Lewis from the original result. And obviously from the results being revisited, he now has a 39-point lead over Lewis in that battle for second. So it kind of I'm just trying to think, what have you got left now? You've got Mexico, Brazil, Las Vegas, Abu Dhabi. I believe I might have missed one. I'm not entirely sure, but it might be just.
There's 4 races. It's 4 races left. So
yeah, so it's Mexico, Brazil, Vegas, and Abu Dhabi. Yeah, so 39 points. I mean, I can't. I'm just trying to think with Lewis. I think Mexico, he could potentially have a chance to go to do well. Score some big points potentially over Perez. I expect Red Bull to dominate. I think Max Verstappen's been so dominant over Mexico for a number of years. If Lewis really feels he can finish second in the championship, I think for at least 3 of the 4 races, he has to finish on the podium and hope that Perez doesn't obviously score as many points as he does. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Obviously, yeah, as I said, 39 points, and I mean, we will talk briefly about the. I'm not going to gloat. I mean, it's absolutely staggering. Max Verstappen leads the constructors' championship by 122 points. I mean, and you did mention about the second teammate, for next year as well. And I think it's going to be even more important next year. I think McLaren are back stronger, Mercedes are stronger. I think Ferrari are now developing on next year's car a bit earlier. It could become a point, isn't it, mate, where Red Bull might have to think about potentially changing Sergio. So is Danny, as you said, is Danny Rick sort of an option as well they might go for?
I think he's the only realistic option. He's obviously been teammates with Max in the past. Liam Lawson so I had some impressive drives while he's been covering Daniel, but to chuck a rookie in against Max, that's going to destroy Liam's career, and that's not fair on Liam to put him in that position. We saw what he did to Pierre and Alex when they were teammates with Max. So you need someone with some experience and some self-belief and confidence. Obviously, Max has taken a few years to wind down Sergio, because obviously Sergio is an experienced driver himself, but Sergio is now worn down. And Daniel, maybe he's accepted that he will only be a number 2 driver. Obviously, he didn't want to drive at the back of the field, but he now wants that Red Bull seat and he's aiming hard for it. So obviously, see how his recovery goes. Obviously, his first race back yesterday. But I think it's very likely he could be in that seat next year if he impresses over the remaining 4 races.
Yeah, let's see. Guys, obviously there's 11 of you watching. Obviously, make sure, I hope you're enjoying the content. Make sure you hit that like button and, of course, subscribe if you are new to the channel. Let's talk George Russell. 5th place finish in the end. Obviously, crossed the line in P6, but obviously got over the line it was P7 actually, crossed the line, didn't he? He was behind Charles Leclerc in the end, so moved up 2 places to P5, and only 8 points behind Charles Leclerc in the Drivers' Championship as well. So, and 16 behind Lando Norris. Russell last year did finish in front of Lewis Hamilton in the Drivers' Championship. This year, it looks likely Lewis will finish above George Russell. But would you say, I mean, even though it's his second season in Mercedes, would you still count this as a strong season for George Russell, or do you feel that there's obviously definitely improvement there? Of course there is, but do you feel that he's maximised in what he's had this year compared to last as well?
I don't think George has had a great season. I think he's been very messy. He's had a bit unluck. Been a bit unlucky with reliability more than Lewis. So I'm not going to point that as George's fault, but he has made a lot more mistakes than Lewis this season. And last year, obviously, believe what you want about Mercedes and Lewis willing to experiment when George wasn't experimenting, which Lewis says is obviously the reason for the gap between them at the end of last year's standings, because he was experimenting where George wasn't. Mm-hmm. Believe that or not, you could say George drove better and Lewis was just struggling from the fallout of 21. But Lewis is back on it this year either way, and George has just been making a mess of it. The updates, you could see, brought a spring back into Lewis's step this weekend. He was driving like he found a honey pot, and he was so happy. George just seemed to struggle with the updates and just couldn't get the speed out of it, where Lewis was on it from the get-go. So those updates were on it. His demeanor changed, in the gloomy face had gone and the smiley face was back because he saw the improvement. And George will get there on these updates, but he hasn't switched them on as quickly as Lewis has.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do agree. And obviously, I mean, as I said, 4 races to go. George Russell I agree. He's had a couple of times a bit unluck with unreliability, but there's been a few mistakes, I think, that have been creeping in, driver errors. Singapore was a sort of maybe heat of the moment thing. Obviously, he was a bit unlucky potentially, but I felt at the end of the day, that's a driving error that you don't expect George to have made from last year compared to this year. But yeah, I fully agree with you, mate. We spoke McLaren, we spoke Red Bull, Ferrari, Aston Martin. Now, Aston Martin, obviously, at the start of the season, obviously, they had a great start. I mean, yesterday, they had, for me, Lance Stroll finishing P7. Starting from the pit lane. Fernando Alonso as well was starting from the pit lane. Got himself really up the order. I think there was like 15 laps to go. He was like P9. they really made the strategies work for Aston Martin yesterday. They could have had a double points finish, and Alonso had a car failure within the last sort of 5 to 6 laps, I believe, if I remember rightly. But I mean, Lance Stroll, he's not had a great season. I personally don't feel Lance Stroll's good enough anyway, but P7, that's an unbelievable finish for Aston Martin for Lance Stroll, and Fernando, a bit unlucky. But what was your thoughts yesterday around the Aston Martin team?
The firstly in the qualifying, it's like, wow, how far have Aston Martin fallen? But it's just understanding the updates. Obviously, they broke Park Ferme to do some setup changes, but they seem to be understanding the updates a bit because the performance in the race was a lot better than they were prior to the other sessions the weekend. So it's nice to see that they get in there with their updates. They're understanding their car a bit because they've lost the development race against Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren now, because obviously McLaren have overhauled them in the constructors. But it was nice to see them getting a solid performance, especially Lance. I agree with you. I don't think he's good enough to be there, but he has had some solid drives in the past and really gone, wow, maybe he does deserve to be here. But this season,
it's always something there, isn't there?
Yeah. This season just hasn't been good enough. But he came back, and maybe he's had a good talking down by his dad, or maybe the team's got behind him after what happened in Qatar, because that was the lowest of the low for him. And maybe he's just managed to rebuild himself up, which is obviously for a driver, it's good if he has managed to build himself up, and he's maybe got some confidence that he can start recovering his season. Yes, there's not much left, but if he can build himself up for next year, then obviously that's going to be good for Aston Martin to obviously have 2 more confident drivers into next season. You don't need Fernando to be more confident. Fernando's already got that confidence in bucket loads.
I think it was Martin Brundle's grid walk, and the last driver that went past was Fernando, and they were talking about, I think he said about the conditions, and Fernando went, yeah, really good, and he just walked off, and I was like, I just love Fernando Alonso. I think he's brilliant, and I felt really sort of sorry for him. Even though my pre-race predictions, I did say Piastri for driver of the day. I did get the top 3 right, but in the wrong order. I put Max to win, but I also put Lewis second. But in the end of it got taken away. But I felt Fernando was so calm, composed, but then the Fernando of old. As you said earlier, Fernando's behind you, Fernando's behind you, and that's just how it was yesterday. And just blitzed the midfield, and obviously got into a point scoring position. And unfortunately for him, a reliability issue, and I had to retire just before the end of the race. Another team that had a retirement as well, Alpine, but I wouldn't say a lonely race for Pierre Gasly, but P6, in front of the new investment team of Alpine. Obviously, Anthony Joshua and Rory McIlroy were in attendance at COTA yesterday, and Esteban Ocon had to retire early with a collision, of course, with Oscar Piastri at the start of the race. But good solid performance from Alpine as well. I think they've consolidated P6 as well in the Constructors' Championship. They've got to 100 points now. But do you feel as well with this investment? With Anthony Joshua, and you got Rory McIlroy, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Patrick Mahomes as well from the NFL. Do you feel that there could be something a bit more with Alpine for next year?
They're definitely investing in the team in a different manner to how it's previously done in the sport. Not saying it's wrong, it's just different. Obviously, it's probably a lot more in the franchise base that they do in American sports. So it could pay off. Obviously, sports in America is really big money, and Alpine would love to have obviously more money. Obviously, budget cap. I'm sure they already operate close to the budget cap, if not at it. But every team wants more money because obviously it helps in just keeping the gears turning, even outside of the budget cap, the things that aren't included. But it's obviously nice to see the team that's had a lot of bad press this year and last year having some good press. But in the race, I always refer to Alpine being in Alpine land because they've got no actual competition in performance. Either cars are a lot faster or cars are a lot slower. It's just Alpine just exists. And I think that's just very much Pierre's races. He just existed in the race, and he just sort of got carried his way up to sixth.
Well, he crossed the line in P8 as well, and that's sort of where you expect him, really. Right.
So it's just a solid performance, which is what you expect from Alpine, but nothing miraculous. It's just Alpine land. It's just they just there.
It's kind of, and you know what? It kind of sort of alludes to what you're saying. I mean, you look in the Constructors' Championship. I mean, as I said, let's forget Red Bull. Of course, they're away. They've done it. But then you look at the battle for the second place between Mercedes and Ferrari. There's 22 points in it between the two teams now for second place. You look in the battle for fourth. I mean, McLaren are now 6 points in front of Aston Martin. I expect McLaren to pull away from that. But then you look at the next nearest challenger, and it's Alpine, and they're on 100 points. They're 136 points behind Aston Martin, and it's clearly what you said there. They're just in Alpine land. They're just in their own little bubble, their own little sort of space, and they're just finding solid performances, solid results, and results that they kind of expect. So, yeah, good finish, obviously, for Gasly in the end. Obviously, he did cross the line in 8th, but got P6 because of the penalties for Lewis and Charles. And obviously, unfortunately, Ocon had to retire early. We'll talk AlphaTauri. Tsunoda finishing 8th. Again, promoted up the order. So a few points for Yuki Tsunoda. And Danny Rick finishing classified last in 15th. But good drive, actually, I believe, from Yuki Tsunoda as well. Again, it was quite a tight battle in the midfield area as well. It was sort of chopping and changing at times throughout the race, but Yuki finishing in P8 as well. And it brings AlphaTauri up. They're only out. They still are at the bottom of the Constructors' Championship, but now only 2 points behind Haas and 6 points off of Alfa Romeo. So that bottom end of the championship is really heating up with 4 races to go.
Yeah, it's on Yuki's performance. It was a really solid drive. Obviously, there was questions early in the season where Liam was covering. It's like, well, Liam's clearly better than Yuki, but Yuki's showing that he hasn't gone off. He hasn't lost any skill, or he's still there. And it was just a solid drive. And the performance of that car seems to be improving as they're developing that car. And it was just sort of really solid round result. And obviously, Daniel, his first race back after an injury, can't really expect more than that, given one race to just get there, and probably a couple of races to even get into some form of routine and fitness level, because obviously the neck takes a beating, and he hasn't had it for a few races. But that championship at the back of the or the bottom of the Constructors, that's going to get really juicy. I'm not going to lie. That's.
I mean, let's add to it as well. I mean, Williams are on 26 points in P7. So from Williams down to AlphaTauri, separated by 16 points. So it takes, you're going to get. And what I was really interested as well is I believe Yuki Tsunoda got the fastest lap of the race yesterday.
He did.
So that's an extra point.
Yeah.
So that's where I think it's going to come down to. I think you might get races like Mexico and Brazil, where teams are in positions when like P10 or P9, and they might take the gamble and go, do you know what? If we can get an extra point here, and it financially, at the end of the season, it means so much for these teams.
Yeah, I do want to add on a cheeky comment that with the FIA, you never know, there could be a surprise disqualification that really may help the bottom teams and get picked up into the points.
Maybe that's what they're doing, Courtney. Maybe that's what they're doing. No, you could be right. I mean, but as I said, obviously AlphaTauri, Yuki Tsunoda P8 in the end. Williams double points finish. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I think they are, and I believe I'm right. Only Red Bull were the only team this weekend, apart from Red Bull and Williams, but the only 2 teams that had a double points finish this weekend. And
you're going to say that very often.
Who would have known? Yeah, Alex Albon obviously promoted to P9, and Logan Sargent. And obviously, I'm going to allow Lee to announce the stat. I don't want to obviously take it away from him because it's actually quite an amazing stat, guys. But obviously, Logan Sargent getting his first ever points finish in Formula One. But Lee, take it away. What is the stat that you said to me earlier?
Well, Logan is the first American driver since 1993, 30 years to score a point in Formula One, I think, since Andretti. So it's a really long time for obviously a country to have some points, but especially the profile that America's getting in the sport now, finally Logan's got a point on home soil at least. And it's obviously well done to Logan. He's had some battering from the media over his performances, but he's got a point. He's done it. So well done, Logan. Good job.
Yeah, no, it was a good job. It was a really good drive from both of them. And you know what? I'm really pleased for Logan Sargent because, you know, for what happened to him in Qatar as well. You know, it's he showed real character and real guts. You know, because it's difficult. You know, at the end of the day, the conditions that was in Qatar. You know, every driver was really struggling with the heat and the humidity. You know, and Sargent's come out of that. You know, a lot stronger, a lot fitter, and he's got himself a world championship point, and that could mean so much to Williams. You know, they've had a really good second half of the year. And, you know, Logan's obviously, you know, for me as well, he's trying to save his own career. You know, he wants that seat next year. I think that's the only seat, I believe, that's not been confirmed for next year. So, you know, Alex Albon, you expect him to be, you know, in the Williams next year. You know, again, another solid drive, P9, you know, in the end. But Logan doing everything he can to keep that seat for next year. So a very, very good day for Williams at Kota. And finally, we'll move to Alfa Romeo. Valtteri Bottas didn't eat too much of his porridge, P12, and Zhou Guanyu in P13. Kind of a really sort of expected result, you would imagine, for Alfa Romeo. Sorry.
Yeah, pretty standard. Unfortunately, they caught my attention in the qualifying when the circuit was pretty actually, and then I was like, oh no, just everyone went a lot faster. It's like I thought that was really impressive times, and they just weren't. But yeah, it just not much they can do. And obviously they have to, as we already said, with the bottom half of the constructors, it's a tight fight, and they have to take every opportunity. And they just unfortunately didn't have the speed today compared to AlphaTauri and Williams, since they're caught at the bottom there along with Haas.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I did say finally, but I did forget the Haas team. How could I forget them? The home team this weekend, Nico Hülkenberg finishing, I've always wanted to do that on the show, finishing 11th, and Kevin Magnussen finishing 14th. Now, Adam, no, I'm not doing the Kevin Magnussen Hülkenberg thing whilst I'm on the stream and you're not. But obviously, yeah, P11 for Hülkenberg and 14 for Kevin Magnussen. Again, I mean, unfortunate for Haas, there was not another penalty because Hülkenberg may have scored a point. But again, not a bad weekend. Obviously, they did struggle for pace. You know, even in qualifying, they did struggle a little bit, but not a bad result, I would say, in the end. It's just not a point to show for it, I think, in the end.
I think this race was, unfortunately, because it was a sprint weekend, was just a glorified test session. Obviously, Haas have changed their concept. They brought all their upgrades and they've gone for a Red Bull inspired car now. Because obviously Haas have been really struggling all this season because their concept they had previously used, which was Ferrari inspired, wasn't working. So the fact that they haven't had a chance to understand their car, they've got plenty of data, and obviously hopefully they can understand their updates into the remaining races. But it's all the teams now bringing upgrades, so obviously any performance now great, but it's all about understanding next year. And if Haas can get their concept sorted now, it means they can develop over the winter and hopefully be more in the fight for next season.
I mean, yeah, and I agree. And I mean, as I said, I'm looking at the bottom end of the Constructors' Championship. I mean, there's fights, you know, second to third and fourth to fifth. There's fights in Alpine or in Alpine land, as you obviously said. And then, you know, Williams, Alfa Romeo, Haas, and AlphaTauri separated by 16 points going into the last 4 races of the season. I believe that's all the sprint races done, isn't it? Or is there one more?
I think there's one more in Brazil.
Is it Brazil? Yes. I mean, again, there's opportunities to potentially, if there's something does happen, you know, there's another opportunity to score points there. But yeah, I think overall driver of the day for you, I know it was Lando Norris was voted driver of the day, but who do you feel was the driver of the day yesterday, in your opinion?
For me, it was Lando. The way he obviously took off at the start and forced his way into the lead past Charles. Held the lead for the first stint. In knowing that at the end of the day, as I said, Max is coming. There was no debate. Max wasn't going to appear on the scene at some point. So he knew Max was coming, and he probably could have guessed that the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton was going to come along as well. It was more, I can hold off Lewis. I can't hold off Max, but I can hold off Lewis. And that's where I feel you saw the fights between Lewis when Lewis turned up on the scene and he's going to fight for Lando. That was some really skillful driving between the two. Bit late lunges from Lando, but brilliant driving, very skillfully done, well placed, and really enjoyable fight. That was my favorite part of the race. Was actually their fight.
I was a bit worried from the first corner. Was it the first corner when he went very late with Lewis? But then again, it was good respect for both drivers as well.
Yeah, it was a really late lunge, and it could have been such a messy incident, but it just shows you the kind of skill that these drivers in Formula One have, that you can race really hard and fast, and they obviously don't have an incident.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm going with Max Verstappen. He gets it all the time himself. He can't have this one. Do you know what? I mean, originally, as I said, my pre-race predictions, I went with Piastri. But in terms of, I mean, I understand why you've gone with Norris, and Norris was a good shout, and I think he deserved it overall. But I think in terms of bounce back and in terms of his performance and the bravery again that you show, I'm going with Logan Sargent. I think Logan Sargent getting a point, a very good performance. Obviously, as I said, from Qatar, it was obviously unfortunate for him to pull away from the race, but he got his first point, and obviously it's on home soil, and it's obviously hopefully a boost for him going into the rest of the season to keep the seat at Williams next year. So I'm going with Logan Sargent as my driver of the day yesterday. But yeah, apart from that, I think we've covered mostly everything regarding the Grand Prix yesterday. Obviously, another good result, another win for Max Verstappen. That's win number 15 of the season, his 50th Grand Prix win of his Formula One career. Just holding on, of course, to Lewis Hamilton until the penalties then went into play. Lastly, mate, of course, we'll do our Mexican Grand Prix preview at some point this week. But is there a chance, do you believe, that Lewis could still catch Perez going into the last 4 races?
Lewis could still catch Sergio, but I think it's more unlikely now than it obviously was before the penalty, or disqualification, I should say, more than penalty. Obviously, as you already said, the sprint weekend, there is still another sprint weekend to come. Especially going with Brazil, we know how hectic Brazil can be. It could be dry, it could be wet, it could be changing conditions, and it's a right curveball. I think that's really where Lewis would need to make a big dent in Sergio's points haul. And if obviously that's in 2 races, if he hasn't closed the gap, it's not going to happen for the end of the season. But there's still a chance for him to do so. But obviously Red Bull and Sergio are going to be trying the hardest to secure that P2 slot. And obviously it'd be good for Sergio if he could get a win and himself and secure it. Obviously that would widen the gap nicely for him. But it is possible.
I don't think it'll be the shenanigans from last year when Max Verstappen wasn't sort of playing ball and helping out with P2 for Perez in the championship. That was kind of strange, wasn't it? Like, no, I don't do this. And obviously, I mean, Leclerc obviously held on for it. But I mean, personally, I still believe there is a chance it's going to be very difficult, of course, with the 4 races, and of course Max again just having a good dominant weekend again. But let's see what Sergio Perez turns up after the next few races. But obviously, I think we'll leave it there. We've been live for just over 45 minutes. I think we've had a good debate, good conversation about the race, obviously, yesterday. And as I said, guys, of course, I'll be helping out this week. We are doing the Mexican Grand Prix preview, potentially Wednesday or Thursday this week. Obviously, we will let you guys know. But obviously, until then, guys, obviously, make sure you hit that like button. And of course, if you haven't, make sure you subscribe to the DNF1 channel on YouTube. And of course, if you are listening on Spotify, if you're listening on all the other social platforms, of course, give it a 5-star review. I'm trying to remember what Adam says. Obviously, when it comes to, I do remember the last thing, and I'm actually going to do it because I turned around and said to him, I'm going to do it. I'm actually going to do it at the end of it. So obviously, yeah, guys, make sure you like the stream and of course, subscribe. And remember, if you're not last, you're probably DNF1. So there you go. I've got it right. I think I got it right.
Yeah.
So Lee, thank you very much, obviously, for coming on as always. And we will have Courtney back this week, guys, for your viewing pleasure. So until then, stay safe, and we will see you for the Mexican Grand Prix preview.